Matthew Holt. Here's a quick THCV spotlight. We're going to do an update on Glooko. And I have sitting with me, Russ Johannesson. He is the CEO of Glooko. Well, he's been for a while now, although he was a key part of the share care management team back in the teens. What do we call that decade?
Early teens.
Early teens. But you've been with Glooko since 2018, 2019, something like that, Ross?
Early 2018, yeah. It's been a little more than 4 years now. Good to see you, Matthew.
So good to see you. So the Glooko, when it first came out, been around a while now, I think 2010, 2011, something like we founded. Glooko was a data management platform for diabetes, primarily aimed at providers, right? Clinics, more so than employers or others, and servicing them. So can you catch us up on that business? And then I know a lot has happened in the last few years as well. You've made a bunch of acquisitions last year. You raised some more money. I think you've raised over 100 million now. Let's just sort of figure out the state of, what is the state of play of Glooko now? What are you doing for whom?
Sure, you bet. Yeah, I think you're spot on. Started as a data management solution first for clinical systems, mostly for diabetes specifically. Where we're at today is we are the largest connected care platform for diabetes and related chronic conditions. I say related because we've expanded over the past couple of years to provide support for the adjacent comorbid conditions to diabetes, starting with things like hypertension and obesity, and we're working down that path. But we've also expanded beyond just the data management component. I mean, a key part of our platform is that we are device agnostic. We do have integrations with over 95% of the devices that are out there in the market, be that insulin pumps, connected insulin pens, CGMs, blood glucose meters, but all the way down through connected weight scales and blood pressure cuffs and fitness trackers to bring all of that data into a single universal solution that a clinician and a care team can use to make better treatment recommendations for patients. At the same time, we have a free mobile application for patients globally, anywhere who want to download that and connect their devices, look at the data insights that we're pushing to them, but importantly, to also allow them to connect and share their data remotely with their care teams, either in support of a virtual visit or in advance of an in-person visit. That's a key part of our connectivity. So we've shifted from data management to remote patient monitoring, to advanced analytics that wrap around that. We do integrations with EHRs so the data for the clinical teams can flow in and out easily. And we've developed some digital therapeutic solutions as well, some of which, right on our platform for clinicians to work with their patients with, some of which we're doing on behalf of pharma companies and device companies, creating a digital wrapper for a drug or a device that they want to take through trial and into commercial launch. That's a big piece of our business. And we've also continued to support clinical research, which certainly with the pandemic, the opportunity to provide support for virtual clinical trials, decentralized clinical trials has really taken off. So we can support that in a number of different ways. And that's been a big part of our business. So the evolution continues. Like you mentioned, we made a couple of acquisitions in the last part of last year, which continue that growth and that evolution. And I'm happy to kind of give you a little snapshot of those too, if you'd like.
Yeah, well, let's dive into that in a second. But so the core, right, is that you've got this technology wrapper around the connection between a patient and a clinician, right?
Yes.
And you're producing information for both of them from the different devices and what's happening. Tell me a bit about how that starts up. I'm a clinician and I have people with diabetes. How does Glooko make that connection? How do you get on board the patients? How does that work? And how much do you just do technology support? Do you do any coaching or help? Do you surround that with people as well? Or what is the relationship that you get in that Glooko has with both the patient and the clinician?
No, that's great. Great question. Today, Glooko does not provide any of that clinical coaching support. We are a platform that is leveraged by clinical care teams and patients and connecting the two together. The way that we acquire patients onto our platform is really through the clinics, the health systems, the hospitals. We onboard at a health system level. They deploy our solution. It's cloud-based. We can get a clinic up in a matter of hours to get them onboarded. we're solving, the original use case was solving the problem that clinics had of, I've got a patient panel of 1,000 patients. They're using a whole bunch of different devices. And rather than having to download a piece of proprietary software for each one of those manufacturers to see data on a specific patient in a silo, instead I can use Glooko as a universal solution where, regardless of the combination of devices that my patients have, I can see a patient-centered view, all that data in one place, and then the data insights that we can push to them based on the intersection of those data points. And so the clinical care teams use the solution. That's how they manage patient data in the clinic. We're deployed globally in 32 countries, 22 different languages. So maybe it's 31 countries, 22 different languages. And we're in 9,000 clinical locations around the world. We've got about 1.2 million active patients being managed through the platform. So it's that connectivity in patients and providers that really creates that solution. Today, we do not provide the coaching components. There are some implementations we've done. We have done some work in the self-insured employer and payer space. We partner with a couple of coaching firms to provide the coaching capability with our platform underneath. And we're looking at ways to expand our support in those markets in a big way as well. So more to come on that one, probably next time you catch up.
Well, I think the thing that's interesting, right, is that, so 1 million people sounds like a lot, but there are a hell of a lot more people who have diabetes or correlated pieces. So I kind of remember when, the Mongo was going public, he talked about their numbers, like how few it was relative to people.
Yeah, a couple hundred thousand.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, right, is how important is it? How urgent do you think it is for clinicians, medical groups, primary care, whoever they are, endocrinologists, whoever they are, dealing with people with diabetes and correlated morbidities? How urgent is it for them to know about all this stuff out there? Because for decades, right, people had blood glucose meters, they managed themselves, and then they showed up once a quarter or whatever, once every 6 months to see their doctor, and they told them a bunch of stuff, and who knows what was really going on in the background. Yeah. Now we've got the technological capability to do that. How much have clinicians said, oh, okay, now I really need to do a better job, figure out what's going on in the long term, and be monitoring my patients. Now I can get this data, through a system like a Glooko. How far do you think we've turned on the pendulum to them actually saying, yeah, we've got to have this. This is the way we have to be doing care?
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's something where we see the demand and the value proposition gets stronger with the further up the intensity spectrum you get, right? So certainly, in some cases, you can be providing too much data, right? If you're pushing all of this very granular CGM data to a primary care doctor trying to manage a, early diagnosed type 2 patient whose therapy is really just, a lifestyle change, it's probably overkill for the data. For the end of the spectrum where you're dealing with type 1 patients, certainly, or insulin dependent type 2 patients who can really benefit from actively managing their blood glucose levels, staying in range, avoiding hyper and hypo events, it's really critical to be able to do that. The problem in that kind of market is that the number of patients that need that kind of care is increasing. The number of clinicians to serve that population continues to kind of decline on a real basis. And so you've got to bridge the gap with technology-enabled solutions that help them be more efficient in how they do that. And so the ability to take the data presented in the most actionable way for both patient and provider, because there's two aspects to this, right? Patients need to have a handle on their whole self-management aspect of what they're doing outside of an interaction with a clinician. And then they need to be connected to a clinician or a care team who can make determinations of what's happening and make adjustments in titration and do those kinds of things at the same time. So it's really both. And I believe the future of this, the trick to this is really how do you manage the balance of those high tech interventions that can be delivered efficiently through a chat kind of context and don't require human intervention, to when you really do need a human clinician on the other end to make decisions around that. And what's the balance of that high tech and that high touch? That's where we see the promise of things like AI and machine learning capabilities and just-in-time adaptive interventions that can drive behavior change in a more automatic fashion on the self-management side, but to know when to surface those interventions to a human being who needs to intervene, and what level of, clinical care do they need? Can they talk to a diabetes educator? Do they need to talk to a nurse practitioner? Do they need to talk to an endocrinologist? What's the right intervention? And striking that balance, I think, is really where the future lies with all of this.
Right. So that's your justification for buying the AI company from Germany last year, right?
Yeah, exactly. Back in September of last year, we acquired a company out of Berlin. Company was called Expert. We've now rebranded that capability Glooko X inside our platform, but it's an AI machine learning capability. We've got a solution in the German market. The German reimbursement market is a strong reimbursement market for digital health solutions, and that's why one of the reasons why we were looking there. But this AI ML capability is something we're leveraging across all of our platform globally, because I think it meets the point we just talked about.
Tell me a bit about how Glooko gets paid. I assume clinics and doctors are paying for the service. You mentioned drug companies and you're building DTXs for them, and then you mentioned distributed clinical trials, which has become very sexy in the last. Some huge raises just for those areas alone, from the medibles.
Yeah.
Others than that.
Yeah, those three, as well as like I said, a smaller but growing part of our business on the payer and self-insured employer market. On the clinical side, with health systems, hospitals, and clinics, over the history of our company, we've shifted that pricing model to be, over the last couple of years, aligned with the reimbursement opportunity that they have in those markets. Operating in so many different countries, the reimbursement dynamics look very different in different countries around the world. In a place like the US, we've shifted our pricing for health systems, hospitals, and clinics to a per participant per month reimbursement model that aligns to the opportunity that they have for reimbursement against those specific RPM codes that we can support. Same is true in payer and employer market. That's a PPPM kind of reimbursement model in those markets. It looks a little bit different on the digital therapeutic, digital companion side, right? There's some upfront development work for configuration of the platform to support those things, but then there's also an ongoing per patient once they get through trial and out into the commercial world, and clinical research. Again, those are, we have some partnerships at a little bit bigger scale, but those are typically, some setup, run a trial over a period of time and get paid on those. So it varies. Also, just the way the solution itself gets deployed globally, really how we get paid depends on whether we're working with the NHS in the UK or the government of Norway or, commercial payers in the US. It really varies based on the market.
So just at towards the end of our conversation, wanted to raise the non-trivial fact that you probably noticed that last year, I know you raised a bit of money last year, and there was a lot of other people raising money. Since then, things seem to have turned a little bit. We've had a collapse in the public markets for digital health. There have still been some huge rounds this calendar year. In fact, even in recent weeks, we saw hundreds of millions of dollars going to various companies in the remote patient monitoring phase. But clearly, things are not quite where they were. What do you think a company like Glooko has to do to prove yourself on that sort of for your financial backers? Maybe for a great service. How do you where are you in terms of getting to being a profitable company? Do you at that point stay independent, stay private? Do you IPO? Do you end up having to look for a much bigger device partner? How do you think CEOs like you, who've raised a decent amount of cash, been running a business, understand the market, but realize that life is going to be different the next couple of years, are thinking through that process? For
sure, yeah, and you're right. I'm grateful that we did raise money last year, and I wasn't in that process now, for sure. I think if you look at us, we've started to shift how we're looking at the world, just because the world around us is shifting so aggressively. The core fundamentals of what we need to execute on haven't really shifted. We need to drive profitable growth and maintain that. We've been in a mode where we raised money to invest in the business, in particular to drive growth. So sales and marketing focus mostly for the use of proceeds from our Series D round, which is, luckily, we closed that in March of 21, and we're starting to see the dividends given the sales cycles of that kicking off now. historically we took a view of our business of a high growth, almost SaaS tech kind of growth trajectory, where we're looking at things like the rule of 40. Like, we're okay burning as long as we're growing at the top line, 50+% growth, which we've been able to do the last couple of years, which is great. I think now we're taking a much more, reasonable and conservative view of that and saying, okay, well, let's be really careful where we're placing our investment bets. Let's make sure we're in a position to extend our runway as long as we think we need to. I'm confident we could go raise money in the market now. I'm not sure we'd love the valuations and things that are flying around.
That was maybe a bit trickier, right? There is still money around now. Whether there's money around in 9 months,
exactly.
A lot of stuff that who knows.
So we've been able to be in a position where we can manage kind of our spend to our growth trajectory, and we're really starting to hit a nice growth curve that we think will fund us. We can put ourselves on a path to cash flow positive pretty quickly here if we want to tighten things up, but we're still leaning in selective investments that we think are going to pay off in the relatively near term. So I think it's a different world out there now, and we're being a little more cautious than stomping on the gas pedal like we have been in the last couple of years. But I'm just glad that we started that process a little bit earlier, because we're in I think a pretty decent place to be able to both weather any storm that's in the market, but take advantage of the growth that we've been seeing.
Well, and last question. So if you've got a 1.2 million people with diabetes and hypertension related conditions, obesity, whatever, on the platform at the moment, what do you think is a reasonable number that you'll look at your investors, look at your board, look at your organization, say, yeah, we can get to a reasonable number in 18 months? Is that doubling, tripling? And give me a sense about how much you think that we talked about the number of millions and millions of people who have just diabetes, who don't have who aren't on Glooko, probably aren't on any system like that. Where do you think we are in terms of the sort of the shift towards this continuous monitoring, more remote patient monitoring, more what I call the continuous clinic happening?
Yeah, I think the upside in terms of number of patients we could cover is huge. It's a huge market. There's a lot of different solutions out there that are, providing not exactly what we do, but similar support for these kinds of things. And nobody has a massive penetration on this market. So people are trying a lot of different things, and many of the capabilities out there can be used jointly. The problem that I think is more the gating factor is getting, in particular on the health system side, we have a very strong ROI story, especially when you layer it in with the reimbursement opportunity that sits there. It can be a real moneymaker for health systems, but they've got a lot of priorities, and especially coming out of the pandemic, they've got other financial constraints, and leveraging a solution like ours can be a great idea. And it might be number 8 on my to-do list that I never get below number 4 on, right? And so we find that tends to get a lot of interest. It tends to lead to longer sales cycles and decision processes when you're dealing with a C-suite of a health system. But the problem is still there. The problem is growing. We're confident, and we're looking for different ways to get the solution deployed that aren't, constrained. We're trying to take friction out of the market as much as we possibly can. That's why, we put the mobile solution, which can help patients, is free for anybody. You don't have to be connected to a physician. If you want to manage, you want to see your trending information, you want to see how those data elements interact with your lifestyle, your carb intake, your activity, and your blood glucose levels across all your devices, people can use that. We encourage people to do that. But I think we've got to continue to see improvements in the reimbursement models around the country and around the world, frankly, that allow health systems to take advantage of the opportunity, because it does improve health outcomes. It does reduce costs over the long term. We've just got to get more people plugged in and using it.
Yeah, it's just another area where healthcare is not quite paying. The policies and regulations and payment systems are still not paying for the right thing. And we know that's been a big problem for all of health and technology for some time, and
for a long time.
Probably will be for a little while longer. So
I would suspect so, unfortunately. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll wrap it up. I've been talking with Russ Johannesson. He is the CEO of Glooko. Good to catch up with you, Russ. Good to catch up on what Glooko's been doing, and we'll look forward to checking in later and seeing how things are going, and as we go to what is digital health winter or whatever is happening.
Thank you, Matthew. Good to talk to you.
Take care, Russ. Goodbye.